Mushroom risotto today.
Risotto!
Now, you might be thinking, what can I tell you about mushroom risotto? Well, it just so happens that we have the Italian food police right here in residence.
Ciao a tutti.
Alessandro's from Rome. He's a very discerning diner. He's eaten at some of the best restaurants all around the world, and he knows a thing or two about things that taste good. There's a lot of demand for risotto in this house, and if something is not quite right, then I get to hear about it. All of this to tell you that this is the police-approved mushroom risotto.
Risotto!
Okay, don't tell me off.
Risotto.
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 Risotto. Risotto ai funghi.
Risotto ai funghi.
No. Risotto ai funghi. Risotto ai funghi. Risotto ai funghi.
We're gonna need 225 grams of risotto rice. This is Vialone Nano, which is the preferred rice in our house. Vialone Nano is smaller rice grains, exactly what it sounds like. It's got a little bit less starch than arborio rice, and that just means that there's less chance of dense glop we want to avoid, and more chance of smooth creaminess that we want. Then we want dried porcini mushrooms, 30 grams. A note about mushrooms, not all dried mushrooms are equal, some are more equal than others. This is a bag that we picked up in lockdown from Marco Alimentari, and it's done us really well. Honestly, it's better than all the other dried porcini mushrooms that I've tried. I've tried some at Waitrose. They're okay, you can get by with them, but I've been completely ripped off at Borough Market. And this definitely stands out as the most mushroomy flavour. I definitely want a mushroomy mushroom risotto. We need chicken stock. This is 450 grams of chicken stock. Isn't it weird that you measure something liquid in grams, but that's what it says. But basically, just like a pot or a bag like this from the supermarket, that will do fine. Use a light chicken stock. You don't want it to be too heavily chicken flavoured, because that will interfere with the flavour of the mushrooms or whatever other flavour of risotto that you're making. I tend not to go for stock cubes much for risotto because I think some of those flavours are quite bold. They've got that sort of salty flavour in them, and again, I think it interferes. Probably with a mushroom risotto, you might be able to get by with it because the mushrooms have quite a strong flavour if you can get good quality dried porcini mushrooms. But for other risottos, I would really try and stick to a light chicken stock. You can also make your own chicken stock. I've made my own chicken stock, but whenever I make chicken stock, I just feel like eating it by itself, like in a soup. It just seems like I don't really want to put it in a risotto, so I usually don't bother. And also it helps to make this a good weekday store cupboard meal that you can have if you've got stock straight from the freezer, which is what this is. Then we need a bit of butter, 30 grams of butter, parmesan.
Parmigiano.
Parmigiano.
No. Parmigiano.
Parmigiano. No?
Okay.
Let me try again. Say it again.
Parmigiano.
Parmigiano.
No. Parmigiano.
Parmigiano.
Let's give up.
What? What am I getting wrong?
Parmigiano.
Parmigiano.
Okay, better.
Parmigiano.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know what I did right or what I did wrong. Parmigiano, we need 4 grated tablespoons of it. 1 medium shallot. Not too big because we don't want lots of shallot. We just want a bit of shallot. Again, supporting act. I like to get everything ready before I head to the cooker because then all that remains is this stirring, which can be really leisurely. 3 things that we need to do before we head there. The first thing is the porcini mushrooms need to be soaked in warm water for maximum flavour. So I put them in this jug because it's going to make it easier for me to pour out the mushroomy water into the rice when we get to that stage. I'm going to just put enough water in to submerge these mushrooms, and then I'm even going to put a saucer on top because it just helps keep everything dunked in the water. So straight from the tap, warm water in here, just covering the mushrooms. I've got a little espresso saucer that I'm going to put on top to keep all the top layers submerged. That can wait 20 minutes. Then we need to grate our parmesan. 4 tablespoons. Now I'm going to slice my shallot. Dice it finely. We don't want perceptible pieces of shallot with the risotto, but we want the flavour. For equipment, we need 2 pots. One pot we're going to cook the risotto in, it needs a lid. And it needs to be a big and roomy pot, so you've got space for the risotto to move. There needs to be surface space. So that's this, not too deep. And then we need a second pan. This one is to heat the stock in. We need to ladle in hot stock, a ladle full at a time. So we need this guy and that guy. Now we're ready to cook. So let's get our stock in the pan. I'm just going to show you actually. There, it's there. Get it hot, keep it warm. So what I usually do is I start off with it at a high temperature to get it hot, and then I put it right down to 1 just to keep it hot. This pan has been heated a little bit, so now I'm going to plop in half the butter. It's about 15 grams. Oops. Followed by a little splish of a flavourless oil. This is olive oil, and it's just so the butter doesn't burn. Then we're going to put in our finely chopped shallots. And then I'm going to turn the temperature down low because we don't want the onions to brown, we just want them to soften. Onions look softened, so now I'm going to throw in the rice. Increase the temperature at this point, so the rice can handle it. It looks good to me. Now I'm going to put in 2 ladlefuls of the hot stock to start it off. And stir. A medium temperature is good for this, I think. So you don't have to frantically stir. You can just do this kind of leisurely stirring. I chopped up the dried mushrooms, squeezed out the moisture, chopped them up, and now I've just left with the mushroom liquid here. So now that most of that stock has been absorbed, I'm going to go in with the mushroom. Bit more mushroom water, and just keep going a bit at a time until it's gone, and then we switch back to the stock until the rice is cooked. It should take about 15 to 20 minutes from the point that we started. So while we're doing this, let's talk about stirring. Stirring for 20 minutes seems like an arduous job, doesn't it? But it doesn't have to be. In the beginning, when I first started making risotto, it did seem like hard work. But then as I made more, it just became a lot more relaxing. But it also got me thinking about whether we do need to stir constantly. Is there a need for all the stirring? Traditionalists generally stir throughout the entire process. But I have seen Raymond Blanc say on the telly that you don't need to stir constantly. He advocates going in with stock or wine or other wet things all in one go, cook it on a low blip without touching it for 20 minutes, and then stir like mad for 5 minutes at the end. I did also consult Harold McGee's food science theory book, Food and Cooking, and that tells us that the removal of the starch from the grains of the rice by stirring thickens the cooking liquid and makes it creamy. You add small amounts of hot cooking liquid at a time and stir it until it's absorbed, until the rice is soft with a small amount of chewiness at the centre, al dente. This all sounds familiar. This way the rice grains stay separate, whereas if you only stir it at the end, they're more likely to break apart. Adding small amounts of liquid at a time also means more moisture evaporates, and this concentrates the flavour. So Raymond's way doesn't really match that theory. I also read about Felicity Cloak's write-up in The Guardian about risotto. She tried Richard Ehrlich's recipe, and that involves the low blip, and then stirring like crazy for 5 minutes at the end, like Raymond. And she writes that she found the rice was not quite as creamy and slightly firmer than the al dente that we would like. I still wonder if it might work, so I might try it one day. But for today, we're traditionalists. So I've finished my mushroom water. I'm now using the stock, ladle at a time. About halfway through cooking, I've got through about 2/3 of the hot stock I've got on the side pan. It's time to go in with the dried mushrooms that have been chopped. So here they are. It's starting to look quite mushroomy. At this point, I'm going to add some salt and some pepper as well. Sali e pepe. We're getting on for time now, so at this point I start tasting it to see how close to al dente the rice grains are. So now we're towards the end, I start actively tasting the grains every minute or so to see how close it is to al dente, because we want to catch exactly that moment when it's just cooked. At that point we need to take the pan off the heat. We also want to make sure that our cooking liquid is not too wet. This is actually too wet. We want a creamy consistency but not slop. So when you plate it, you don't want the sauce to run out of the edges. You really want it to stay together as one mass. We're so close done now. I'm just watching the liquid. We're done. Pan's been taken off the heat, so now what we need to do is plop in the rest of our butter that we measured before. And we need to put in our 4 tablespoons of grated Parmesan cheese. And then give it a really good stir and clamp the lid on. Lid on. Let it sit for 5 minutes and then we can eat it.
Approvato. Then I'm finishing it. That I'm eating quello che... Risotto ai funghi.